So hello and welcome to the first video on this YouTube channel that actually features my face. I suppose from the jump I should probably say sorry for the hair that says happy lockdown and the face that says not so much. But today we're going to be looking at predictions for the future of motorsport. Now usually I know that people on YouTube, people on podcasts, etc. make predictions for the season ahead, and at some point I will be doing that. But what I want to do is kind of remove myself from this current pandemic landscape a little bit and look ahead a little further to the year of 2025 and see what I think will be happening in the motorsport scene by the year 2025. In some cases it's more what I'd like to see happen by the year 2025, and of course it's a bit fun with prediction videos to kind of go for a long shot and see if it pays off. So don't think I necessarily believe all of this is destined and concrete, definitely going to happen, because I am kind of rolling the dice a bit on a couple of these. First up, let's talk a bit about Formula 1. We'll be peppering in some other categories as well as Formula 1 throughout the video, but we'll start with the Formula 1 point. And I think that by 2025 there will be another manufacturer in Formula 1. I think realistically there needs to be another factory in Formula 1 by the time we get to 2025. Of course, Honda are pulling out of their engine program, Red Bull potentially looking to try and continue it on, but I do think that we're going to need another manufacturer in. The question is, of course, who would it be? Because it's not as obvious as it used to be, with the landscape of motoring as in general going through a lot of changes. The question you have to ask is, well, who's actually going to want to be in Formula 1? BMW strikes me as a potential answer to that question, although with them just recently ending their Formula E program, their Schnitzer touring car program and their RBM touring car program, I think that there is potentially not an interest in continuing in many internal combustion engine centered sports, and Formula E just doesn't seem to be satisfying what they want from the future in terms of motorsport. And if Formula E aren't doing that, then Formula 1 certainly isn't doing that. So it seems like a long shot for BMW, but of course they were very keen on being Formula 1 world champions back in the Williams and Sauber days, so whether that feeling still exists in the boardroom, I suppose, is key, but BMW feels more likely than some manufacturers. Another manufacturer that comes to mind is Toyota. Now, obviously Toyota already have their World Endurance and World Rally Championship programs, so I don't think they'd be doing Formula 1 alongside WEC and WRC, but it doesn't feel impossible for them to make the same decision they made in 1999, where they cancelled their WRC and Le Mans programs to favour joining Formula 1 in 2002. Do I want to see that happen again? No. Do I necessarily think that Toyota would do that again, given how it went in 2002 to 2009? No. But it's, again, one of the more likely major manufacturers in my head. Outside of the kind of mainstream manufacturers, the one that feels most likely to me is actually Lotus. Lotus, of course, has been recently taken over by Geely, who are fairly flush with cash and don't seem particularly anti-motorsport, given they have the Lynk & Co. TCR program. Of course, TCR and Formula 1 are a world apart on budget, but I do think that there is a potential line of thinking that could lead Lotus back to Formula 1. Of course, Lotus is a very motorsport-centric brand. It's a brand that sells itself on its motor racing history. But the problem is that that history at this point is just that. There hasn't really been much in the way of a genuine, noteworthy success for Lotus in motor racing for 30 years? At least in Formula 1 at least. They haven't really had major success for about 30 years. If I was running Lotus, certainly, I would want to see Lotus at the top of motorsport again, to try and sell cars like the Aviga hypercar. I'm sure I said that wrong. But yeah, you know, it seems to me like a brand that needs motorsport success based on the foundation that it has. So if if they have that pot of money available to them to enter Formula One and do it well, then I think that would be what I would do with the brand. My next prediction revolves around Alex Albon. Now, we've seen Alex kicked from the Formula One seat for 2021 at Red Bull, and I think that his Formula One future very much hinges on the successes of Sergio Perez in 2021, because it seems that there isn't that much appetite to put him back into Scuderia AlphaTauri, and Red Bull, I think, are really the only group in Formula One that are going to show an interest. I don't think he's done enough to show anyone else why he should be in Formula One. So I think it's going to be Red Bull or bust for him. But of course, Red Bull are also investing in his career further in 2021 by sticking him into select DTM events. DTM, of course, switching to GT3 regulations for this year. So I think that maybe this could be the dawning of a new era for his career. Now, where do I think that will go? I think inevitably he's going to be at Le Mans at some point, as many talented drivers who don't quite make Formula One do, and I think he'll be very good in the Le Mans landscape. So my prediction for Alex is that by 2025 he will be an overall winner at the Le Mans 24 Hours. Of course, the hypercar category is coming into Le Mans, so there should be no shortage of competitive seats based on the interest being shown by manufacturers. So I think that Alex could well find himself in a winning seat at the Le Mans 24 Hours, and potentially also the World Endurance Championship, of course, by 2025. Next prediction will go to Japan and the Super GT Championship, more specifically the GT500 class. Now, GT500 in its current iteration is essentially the Class 1 rule set that was being shared with DTM, but of course DTM have now ditched that set of rules. Do I think that that class has longevity? Well, the answer, to be honest with you, is a fairly blunt no. The JAF, the organising body of Super GT, have said that yes, they are committed to Class 1 going forward, but I don't think that's particularly wise. Now, this, I think, is more of a fantasy than a likely possibility, but I would really like to see them maybe try and take on a slightly enhanced version of the SRO GT2 rules that have come into force in the last couple of years and are starting to kind of bubble up in motorsport. Of course, the pandemic has kind of slowed down the take-up of the GT2 class, but I do think it's the kind of cars that I personally would love to see back in Super GT. I long for the days of what was then the Japanese GT Championship. You had, obviously, in the 90s, you had Supras, Skyline GTRs, NSXs up against, F40s and Porsche 911s, and the thing was, they all looked relatively stock. They weren't as insane. They didn't have as much aero sprouting forth from them. Of course, Japan has a rich history of kind of taking European rule sets like the GT classes of the 90s and the super touring cars from the 90s and being a bit more liberal with the aerodynamic regulations, which I wouldn't have a problem with. I'd be keen on seeing that again within the GT2 class. So that is my thought. Of course, GT2 is kind of being put into place as a more amateur-centered category. It's meant to be an AM class of motorsport, so it doesn't quite match the sales brief for GT2. But if I was to point Super GT in the direction of what I would want for the future of the category, that's where they'd be pointed to. How likely do you think this one is? Obviously the comments section is there for you to tell me. Next up, back to DTM. DTM, I think, is in a tough place right now. The GT3 regulations that they're moving to doesn't really feel like DTM. It's not Tourenwagen, which of course is the middle, it's the T of DTM. It's meant to be a touring car category, so having mid-engined Audis, McLarens, Ferraris, Porsches, it just doesn't feel particularly DTM-esque to me. If anything, it's more DRM, the category for the Group 5 cars in the late 70s, where the Porsche 935 was so dominant. So what do I think the future holds? I think the future for DTM is probably not going to be one with heavy manufacturer representation. I think they need to focus on customer teams. They need to focus on privateer entries, and they need to make a rule set that allows privateers to build their own cars. Now I think there's a perfect embodiment of that rule set and what could be in the recent past with the Superstars V8 series, a category that I absolutely loved. I recognised that obviously it did die out in the mid-2010s, but I do think there's a lot of potential there, especially with the kind of marketing and television presence that DTM has. So that's what I think they should probably do. The Superstars V8 category would be a really good mould with which to, you know, make DTM a little more of a touring car championship and a little closer to their original identity. The old Superstars V8 cars are big power, limited aero, V8 engines, very much I think in the vein of kind of old school Group A racing more than anything. I think that's maybe where DTM should try and go, of course while keeping the budgets down, because I do think that the privateer aspect is where they should be looking to for the future. So my last prediction, probably my most controversial prediction, is that Lance Stroll will potentially be a Formula One World Champion by 2025. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Lance is the leading light, the first person that comes to mind to take the crown from Lewis Hamilton anytime soon, but what I am saying is I think that he's in a good position to potentially fight for world championships, and I think he's more than capable of doing so. Yes, of course, he has a stigma about him being a very obvious pay driver, literally racing for his dad. But that's not unheard of in motorsport. Everyone in the sport has a lot of money behind them. I think that regardless of the cash, he is a Formula One worthy driver, and I think he's a driver who could challenge with the right car underneath him. Of course, we saw at Monza with his mistake that he was in a situation to potentially challenge for a win, and he didn't manage to hook it up. Turkey, the car was damaged, so it's neither here nor there, but I do think he's got the right head on his shoulders in a pressure situation, and I do think that he's a worthy driver. I also think that Racing Point, or Aston Martin, or Aston Racing Martin Point, will have the budget to move forward and succeed in the 2022 rule set. I think they're going to have some really good people behind them for 2022. They're certainly going to have the money to try and succeed and move up the grid. So I think that with the new rules may come a great era for the former team in pink. Again, I'm not saying that he's the most obvious guy to become dominant as soon as Lewis Hamilton hangs up the helmet, but I do think that he is worthy of a world championship battle if he's got the car underneath him, and I wouldn't mind betting that Racing Point Aston Martin will give him that car from 2022 onwards, so I'm sticking with it. I'm going to say that I think Lance Stroll could well be a world champion come the year 2025. So that's my list of predictions for 2025 in motorsport. Just how far off base am I? Well, you can tell me in the comments, but it will have to wait 4 years to know the truth. Obviously, like I said, some of these are more hopeful than sheer, predictions. I'm not a stock market analyst. I'm not saying that this is definitely going to happen or necessarily that it should happen, but I do think that they are all within the realms of possibility, or at least within the realms of what I would like to see. So that's my list. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done already. There's lots more motorsport-centric content on the way. I'm looking forward to doing more of this kind of thing with the to-camera aspect, and a lot more kind of list videos with just my voice in the background and pretty race cars, which objectively will be the more enjoyable view. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon. Ta-ta for now.